Hey there, I'm Claire, and I've got a tale to tell. I was around 6 or 7 years old when it all started. My parents' divorce occurred at that time. Harold, my dad, just couldn't take it anymore. For a long time, my mom, Isabella, had been bugging him about how he was underpaid. She was always putting him down, and he felt useless because of it. One day, my dad was overjoyed to come home from work because he had received a promotion. For once, he felt proud of himself, and it showed in his enormous smile. However, Mom merely expressed her disapproval, saying, "That's it. You seem to have landed a steady work, didn't you?" His expression dwindled as I saw. To see a balloon gradually deflate was like being a spectator. Following that, Dad departed. It makes sense now that I'm an adult. My entire universe seemed to be collapsing at that moment. Mom viewed his departure as a chance for growth. In no time at all, she had a plan to capitalize on the poor single mother narrative. To appease her supervisor, she would pretend to be depressed every day at work. "I apologize for being late once again, Mr. Frank," she would say, acting as if she were crying. I couldn't find anyone to assist Claire when she was sick. Even though I was perfectly content staying home and watching cartoons, Mr. Frank would reassure her by patting her hand. Mom cared for her hair and cosmetics for hours. We hated getting together as a family. My mom would act out the story of how my dad left us high and dry, leaving us with nothing. I would fidget in my chair, aware it wasn't true. Although I remained silent throughout, I should have known better than to publicly embarrass my mom even when I was so little. Dad was secretly sending money every month, and no one knew about it. It was dubbed child support by him. Mom used to say, "Look at this, Claire," while waving the checks in my direction whenever they arrived. "In your father's estimation, this pitiful sum is sufficient to support a family." Very bad. I had no idea what the intended amount was. All I knew was that it infuriated her. It was already difficult for me when Mom was furious. My ability to observe details improved as I grew older. On occasion, Mom would narrow her gaze as if she caught sight of something she didn't approve of. The reason I looked too much like my dad was eventually explained to me. For her, those were not pleasant recollections, but I remained in her employ nevertheless. You see, I served a purpose. It was impossible to pass up the heartwarming picture of the suffering single mother and her courageous little kid. It garnered her pity, preferential treatment, and even financial aid from the government. Then, once again, everything changed when I was around 10 years old. Mom and Jack met. Wealthy, accomplished Jack. Being a struggling single parent suddenly lost its allure. Becoming the loving wife of a prosperous businessman was her new position. Plus, that depiction no longer included me. It was modest at first. Every day I went to school on clothes, as Mom forgot to wash my clothing. As the other kids made fun of me and muttered and pointed, I would arrive in rumpled and ruined clothes, mortified. Next, there was the matter of the food. The home would be filled with the enticing aroma of Mom's elaborate dinners as she prepared them for her and Jack. However, she would apologize to me when I arrived at the table. There wasn't enough for 3 of them. You could whip up a sandwich for yourself. Why not? My stomach would start to rumble, so I would whip up a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the kitchen. The sound of Mom and Jack laughing and the clinking of wine glasses in the dining room made my meager lunch feel even more inadequate. The most distressing aspect was when she began interfering with my academic assignments. I used to put in a lot of time on a project, and then the following morning, it would just vanish. I would arrive at school without anything and had a hard time explaining what had transpired to the teacher. My instructors began to take a more concerned look at me as my grades began to decline. Jack appeared oblivious throughout. Even when he was home, he neglected Mom in favor of his work. She was just wonderful as the doting wife. As she caressed his shoulders, she would whisper, "Jack, my darling, you work so hard. You need some time away." In utter awe, he would smile and gaze up at her. "Isabella, I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here," whatever he would say. The news that Mom was pregnant only made matters worse. Both Jack and Mom sunk their teeth into it. "The doctor says I need lots of rest," she would tell me as she lay on the couch. "Please, would you be so kind as to clean up the house?" While Mom napped or talked on the phone with friends, I cleaned during the afternoons. She would slowly stand up, clutching her almost there baby bump, as soon as Jack returned home. The words, "Oh, honey, I'm so tired," would come out of her mouth. A lot of effort goes into growing a baby. Jack, anxious, would dash over. "Take a seat, my darling. Please fetch water for your mom, Claire." My sense of isolation grew as the months passed. My insecurity made me withdraw socially from my school pals, and I eventually stopped inviting them over to my place. Even at my own house, I felt out of place. Mom treated me more like a servant and expected me to do her bidding. As I lay in bed one night, engrossed in Mom and Jack's enthusiastic discussion about nursery decor, a switch went off in my brain. It became too much for me to manage. I had to leave the house. I did something I had never dared to do before. I picked up my phone, trembling. I contacted my father and informed him about everything: the disregard, the psychological manipulation, and the persistent sensation of being unloved. To reassure me that he was still with me, Dad listened softly. His breathing was the sole sound. There was a lengthy pause when I finished speaking. Then he said, "Get whatever you need. I will come and retrieve you." He sounded serious and authoritative. I woke up bright and early the following morning, my heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I was too nervous to sleep the night before, so I packed all of my belongings. Coming from the kitchen, I could make out Mom's words as I pulled my bag down the stairs. "Hey, Claire, are you leaving?" she inquired. I was ready for a fist fight when I froze. But as I pivoted around, I beheld her propped up against the entrance, a peculiar grin gracing her countenance. It was almost as if she was relieved. "I'm going to live with Dad," I declared, my voice more forceful than my anxiety. I was taken aback as Mom's smile spread even farther. According to her, well, it's about time. Her tone was nearly joyful. We could use the extra room for the baby, Jack and I. Her remarks were as rude as a slap in the face. A car horn outside cut me off before I could utter a word. Dad had shown up. Still wearing that unnerving smile, Mom escorted me to the door. "Hope you have a wonderful life, Claire," she remarked, nearly forcing me to leave. On my way to Dad's car, I stole a quick glimpse back. As she waved farewell, Mom stood in the doorway, her expression of joy clear. I was going, and she was happier than I had seen her in years. Although it was cramped, I felt more at home at my dad's apartment than in any other I'd stayed in a long time. Unfortunately, our time there was brief. I was awestruck as Dad's business skyrocketed over the following few months. A new contract, a major client, or expansion ideas seemed to pop up in his inbox on a weekly basis. We were house hunting in some of the city's most desirable neighborhoods in less than a year. It was a fantastic house that we purchased. Modernist architecture spanning 2 levels, featuring expansive windows and a magazine-perfect backyard. Compared to our previous flat, my room was much larger. While my dad put in countless hours running his now thriving business, I focused on making our large house feel more like a home. The house was filled with the aroma of exquisite cuisine as I mastered the art of cooking. I oversaw the cleaning crew, planted a garden in the spacious backyard, and kept the entire place neat and tidy. Things started to shift as the months passed. I saw the fruits of Dad's labor crop up time and time again. Our lives became even more fulfilling as his business continued to thrive. I changed schools and enrolled at the city's top private institution. A brand new luxury SUV was the enormous surprise that my dad bought me for my 18th birthday. "Now you can drive yourself to school in style," he remarked with a smile, handing me the keys, "and perhaps do a few errands for your grandpa, too." My thoughts of Mom gradually faded as I adjusted to my new life. Neither she nor any of my relatives on her side ever contacted me, and I made no effort to get in touch with them either. It was still too soon, and the anguish of the memories was too great. Rather, I devoted myself to my academics. I was a college honor graduate before I even realized it had been years since I had started. On the stage, with my diploma in hand, I cast my eyes toward the audience, hoping to see my dad among them. I momentarily lost consciousness as he stood there, beaming with pride. Being loved deeply felt like this. In a smiling gesture, Dad drew me aside after the ceremony. His eyes gleaming, he declared, "I have something for you." A little box was his gift to me. The key was within. "This is for your brand new downtown apartment. It could be a present for graduation." I embraced him fiercely, my eyes watering from the emotions. "Amazing, Dad. I'm grateful for everything." After finishing college, a few years passed. This was a great time for my career. My life was perfect. I had a stunning downtown apartment. A regular schedule of weekly dinners and lengthy phone conversations had been established between my dad and myself. Everything looked wonderful. For a while, it was. Like a bolt of lightning on a sunny day, the news hit. Father was ill, metastatic cancer. Although the doctor's speech became muddled with medical jargon, the gravity of the situation was crystal evident. My entire focus shifted to finding a way to rescue Dad after that. Stepped away from my job for a while and returned to his residence to tend to his needs. Concern for his well-being consumed my entire day. I did all I could think of to give us a fighting chance, including consulting experts, researching treatments, and exploring alternative remedies. Hope and sorrow interacted in a difficult way during the months that followed. Dad had 3 terrible days filled with agony and illness from the treatments for every one good day when he felt well enough to sit outside or enjoy a meal. After a long day, I was putting him to bed one night. A grave look crossed his face as he shifted to face me. He spoke in a barely audible whisper, calling out to Claire, "I require that you make a solemn pledge to me." A knot had formed in my throat, so I could only nod in response. "Do what makes you happy," Dad said. "Make the most of it. You won't be held back by this." He would be okay. I wanted to dispute with him about it, yet we were both aware that was not the case. Instead, I gave him a firm grip and whispered, "I promise, Dad." 3 weeks subsequently, he died. As he took his last breath, I held his hand and told him how much I loved him and was grateful for all he had done. A haze enveloped the subsequent days. As I went about making funeral arrangements, I felt apathy. Everything from the casket to the flowers to the obituary needed attention. It seemed as if I were arranging a plot for someone else. The whole thing seemed surreal. My phone started buzzing when I was inside the funeral home, trying to decide which songs to play at the service. A number that has not been identified called. I was going to ignore them, but then I felt compelled to answer. "Hi there. Your mother, Claire," the voice said. I almost let go of the phone. She finally decided to speak up after years of being silent. "So what's your desire?" With a distant tone, I inquired. "I was informed about Harold," she remarked, her voice lower than what I recalled. "I apologize, my love. The funeral is something I'd like to be a part of." The need to sever the call and demand her solitude washed over me. I longed for my mother's consolation because I was so exhausted and stressed, and because there was a tiny part of me that I had buried long ago. The words "all right" escaped my lips. "Say, you can help?" I felt like I had opened a door I should have kept closed as I concluded the call. But now that Dad was dead, my mom was the only relative I had. My mom and my half-brother Brian arrived at the funeral home exactly 1 hour after she called. Now, at the age of 15, he stood tall and ungainly. I observed as Mom was very careful with him, making sure his tie was straight and his hair was nice. She showed Brian the kind of love and attention that I had never gotten, and it stung. Inquiring, "What is it that you require of me?" she wanted to know. Even though I was hesitant, I delegated responsibilities to her. I was taken aback by Mom's helpfulness. She oversaw the meals, coordinated the floral arrangements, and handled the steady stream of sympathizers. The actual funeral was a blur. I stood there, emotionless, as strangers rushed up to me to offer their condolences. As if to reassure me, Mom remained nearby, occasionally placing her hand on my arm. Following years of abandonment, it was weird to have her there, behaving maternally. Mom came over to me once again after the service, while people were leaving the cemetery. I realized this might not be the appropriate moment, but I would like to remain in contact. She said, "Claire, perhaps we can meet up for coffee at some point." I couldn't tear my eyes away from the woman who had made my upbringing so awful and who had been relieved when I left. No longer had any relatives save for her. "Perhaps," I finally answered. "I'll think about it." Surprisingly, Isabella was true to her word. She called me numerous times in the weeks that followed, her voice betraying her genuine worry at every turn. "How are you doing, sweetie?" Someone would inquire of her. "Do you need anything?" I was untrusting and distant at first, giving her brief responses. I wanted a connection, something with Isabella as the days passed and the burden of Dad's absence became worse. We began with very basic topics of discussion. My residence, my friends, and my job were all topics of inquiry. However, as time went on, her inquiries started to change. "Your father's business," she noted in passing. "I pray it won't be too much. Harold was always the hardest worker." Without further ado, I would shift gears. I was really taken aback, to be honest. My dad had bequeathed the business and the family home to me. It was too much to bear, and a part of me, harmed by years of dealing with Isabella, wanted me to keep quiet. Over the course of several weeks and months, Isabella's hints grew increasingly overt. "Brian is looking at colleges," she mentioned during one of the calls. "These days, tuition is really pricey. How we'll handle this is a mystery to me." A non-committal sound from me, and my guard immediately went up. "Jack has experienced some difficulties at work," she added another time. "Everyone is feeling the effects of the economy." I could feel the strain in her voice every time we talked about money or their problems. It was as if we were having a conversation every time. I was beginning to let down my guard after Isabella's unexpected acts of compassion, despite my reservations. Even though it was against my better judgment, I began to chip in with little cash. It all began simply enough, covering a month's rent when Jack's firm hit a hard patch, paying for Brian's SAT prep sessions, and purchasing Isabella a new laptop when hers broke. "You're absolutely wonderful, Claire," Isabella would exclaim. "I don't know what we'd do without you." I experienced an inward glow whenever she uttered such words. Is this what it means to have a true family? I dove headfirst into managing Dad's business at the same time. I kept my position as owner and made all the major choices, including elevating his reliable deputy to director. Sitting in Dad's old office brought us closer, despite the hard labor. The frequency and size of Isabella's requests increased with time. What began as one-time assistance became the norm. One beautiful Sunday afternoon was the tipping point. When Isabella called, I was in the middle of compiling quarterly reports. "Claire, my darling," she started, her voice being too kind. "It has been a very long time since our last family vacation, and that has been on our minds. this incredible price on a tour of Europe was discovered by us. My heart sank. Isabella, I don't know. I began to speak. It would be incredibly meaningful to Brian. She interrupted me. After all we've been through, don't you think we deserve a little happiness? In the midst of a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, rage, and a lack of self-control, I agreed to foot the bill for their vacation. It was far from over, though. Isabella was back on the phone the day following their return. With a more forceful and less sympathetic tone, she spoke now about Brian's college fund. We're counting on you to get things arranged immediately. You know, he's really bent on Borton. A part of me finally broke. The years of abandonment, the manipulation, and the emotional games all surfaced at once. No, I murmured, my voice quivering. No more, Mother. Okay, I'm finished. A breath held. Next, Isabella's tone became icy. Now that we've taken care of everything for you, you impolite snot, what a coward you are to abandon your loved ones. A sour chuckle escaped my lips. Relatives. Check. I take it you mean my mom, who was relieved to see me depart? Who was it that ruined my youth? Tensions flared up. After putting on an act of friendliness, Isabella threw insults and accusations. With pent-up resentment and agony, I fought back. You're a carbon copy of your dad, she spit out, selfish and cold-hearted. I am so grateful for that, I replied quickly. At least he loved me. A dead end was reached. With my grip on the phone tight, I remained motionless, trembling. It was deafeningly quiet. I jumped at the opportunity to go on a month-long business trip overseas. A chance to get away and recharge my batteries. The ideal getaway? A tremendous burden was lifted off my shoulders as I got on the plane. Perhaps what I needed was to take a break and be alone. It had been a month, and I was ready to return to my own place. I was ready to collapse in my apartment after a productive yet draining journey. Something seemed off, though, when I turned the key to unlock the door. My spirits plummeted as I pried open the door. A new world had emerged. I didn't recognize the decor that had replaced my carefully selected furniture. From the couch, an astonished couple peered at me. "Who are you?" Rising in terror, I yelled out, "What are you doing in my apartment?" Standing up, the man appeared bewildered. "The place you live. Just a few weeks ago, we acquired this property from an Isabella." Everything revolved around me. "Hey, Isabella, is that my mom?" "Oh no, that's impossible. Some error had to have occurred." I remained motionless, my voice quivering. Truthfully, I had no intention of selling this suite. I've been away for a while. It was obvious that the pair was frightened as they exchanged looks. "We have all the paperwork," the woman stated with an air of uncertainty. "Maybe you should talk to your realtor." My thoughts were all over the place as I limped out of the flat. Despite my initial impulse to report the scam to the authorities, I felt compelled to address Mom first. It was important for me to hear it directly from her. I called her number, my fingers shaking with fear. A couple of times it rang. "Hello, Claire." Mom had an excessively lovely voice. "How was your trip?" "Mom, stop being so silly," I told her. "What did you do to my apartment?" After a considerable interval, Isabella started laughing. A mocking, I see laugh, which caught me off guard. "Oh, Claire," she murmured with an air of insincere compassion. "It wouldn't have gotten this far if you'd just given freely. Know that you brought this upon yourself." I felt like I was getting punched in the gut. "You sold my apartment. How? What would you do? It's time for me to call the cops." "Oh, really?" Isabella spoke up, her voice taking on a harsh tone. "Are you seriously planning to depose your own mother? We both know you lack the courage to do that, so please don't." Without warning, the call cut off, and I found myself alone and shocked on the pavement. Though her arrogant self-assurance inspired me, I got into a cab without giving it much thought and instructed the driver to drop me off at Isabella and Jack's house. Anger and adrenaline surged through me as I banged on the door. Jack seemed perplexed as he responded, "Claire, what's going on?" He was in my way as I pushed into the house. "Where's Isabella?" "That was my requirement." He repeated, "She's not here," his expression growing increasingly perplexed. "Claire, what is this about?" I hurriedly filled him in on every detail, including the flat and Isabella's confession. I noticed that Jack's cheeks were turning white as I spoke. "That's just not possible," he exclaimed, taken aback. "The cost of Brian's education is not an issue. That has already been budgeted for." As the realization dawned on us, we locked eyes. Jack began to fumble with his wallet and pull out bank and credit card statements. As we delved into them, the complete narrative emerged. In order to get out of her debt, Mom had discreetly taken out loans. I was completely unaware, Jack muttered, his face contorted into astonishment. Curiously, I also felt sympathetic. To no end had Jack been fooled. My resolve hardened as I learned of Isabella's complete deceit. It had shifted from being solely about me. This was completely deceitful. Without hesitation, I did what was necessary. A tremendous burden was relieved from my shoulders as I ended my call with the 111 operator. I had been Mom's scapegoat for far too long, but that is all over now. It was necessary to conduct the subsequent inquiry, which was not easy. With each new piece of information, Isabella's deceit became more apparent. She had been leading a second life, not only forging my signature to sell my apartment. Expensive clothing, trips to the spa, and stays at 7-star hotels were all detailed on the credit card bills. It was all paid for via a labyrinth of deceit and concealed loans, and none of it was revealed to Jack. Reporters flocked to the courthouse outside the building in search of any juicy tidbits about the trial, which quickly became a media circus. Being the center of attention was hell for me, but I had to admit that it felt good to watch Isabella's flawless image crumble in front of everyone's eyes. Finally, fairness was achieved. All sorts of charges were leveled against Mom, including fraud and forgery. I can still hear the judge's remarks. "You have betrayed your family's trust and shown total contempt for the law, Mrs. Isabella Sermon. You are to pay Claire Surin back the entire value of the apartment and serve a 4-year prison term." Throughout, Jack remained in a state of shock. He gave me a call the day following his punishment. "Claire," he murmured, his voice quivering, "I am requesting sole custody of Brian in my divorce petition. I can't allow her to be in his presence after what she did." After that, I got back to the business of making my life whole again. I got my money back from the apartment and used it to buy a little house on the outskirts of town, giving myself a fresh start. To the best of my ability, I have dedicated my life to carrying on my father's business. Even though it was difficult, I enjoyed the work, and I finally felt like I was doing something on my own. I maintain communication with Brian. He has Jack's full backing as he studies engineering at college. Having a relationship with you is a blessing, even though it's a bittersweet one. Isabella, on the other hand, has been silent since the trial. Honestly, I'd rather not know whether she has made any attempts to contact me. That chapter of my life has closed.